Hello, everyone, and welcome to the May 28th meeting of the Oregon Public Defense Committee's Governance Subcommittee. I know it has a longer name, but I can't ever remember what all the other parts are, so governance will have to do. Um, we have a little bit of a change in the order of um, what we're going to consider because Heather Kessinger is having some internet issues that we hope will get resolved. So we'll start with Dacia Smith talking to us about the Oregon administrative rules. And let me just say that I know that there was material, I'm sure you've all read it, and I think it's important to understand some basic concepts. So I know that Dacia will be making them clear, and I will go ahead if there's something that I think I don't understand. I'll go ahead and ask, and anyone else, if there's a concept you need clarified. Um, Dacia, is it okay if people just raise their hand and ask as you're going along?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thanks very
Yes,
much.
yes,
Please get started.
yes. Hello, Chair Mandelberg and members of the Commission's Governance Subcommittee. I am Dacia Smith, the agency's Rules Coordinator. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to provide additional information about our agency's rulemaking process. Next slide, please, Mara. There are 3 levels of rules, and each will have varying degrees of commission and partner engagement. These levels have flexibility and fluidity to move between each of them based on discussions with the agency and the commission. Essentially, we anticipate the rules to triage between levels where each includes commission discussion and review, partner feedback, and public comment. Level 1 are required rules that restate statute. These have specific requirements that allow for little to no modifications or changes. Level 2 will result in strong commission engagement. This is to provide the agency with key points that commissioners may wish the agency consider when developing a rule. An
Sorry, Disha.
example may be some agency acronyms and definitions.
Excuse
I'll
me, I think
hold, I'm sorry.
Philippe has his
Sorry.
hand up. Let's see if there's a question.
Yes, sorry about that. Can I just ask why is there a requirement for a rule to restate a statute?
Um, it is to develop, oh, excuse me, Chair Mandelberg and Commissioner Nab, thank you for the question. It is to establish shared agreement amongst all agencies of the requirement and to communicate these with the public. It also holds the agency accountable to ensuring that we are following our processes.
Philippe, this is required by statute and regulation. It's not a requirement of ours. We just have to
Okay.
do it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. It seems a little silly to me, just for the record.
If that's the only statutory or regulatory requirement in Oregon that seems silly to you, I'm amazed.
Yes, I'm sure there's others. I'm
Yeah.
sure that's not the only one. I wanted to get clarification on why we would have a rule that would restate a statute. That was my only question.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Go ahead, Dacia. Thank you.
Level 2 rules will result in strong commission engagement. This is to provide the agency with key points that commissioners may wish the agency consider when developing a rule. An example may be some agency acronyms and definitions. Other definitions, such as the word rural, are likely to benefit from more robust engagement with our partners and the commission. Level 3 rules will result in the agency engaging in thoughtful discussions with our partners and the Commission to develop a shared understanding. These three levels of rules are essentially a form of triage and designed with flexibility and fluidity to scope our work and to ensure we allow for more inclusive discussions and collaborative timelines. Next slide, please, Mara. The rules we're discussing today are all Level 1 restatements of statute. The first is the Uniform and Model Rules of Procedure. This is required to enact all other rules. It outlines the process the agency is required to follow for rulemaking. The second is the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. This is required and provides the public with details of agency rulemaking communications. The third is delegation of authority. This rule allows the director to designate staff to coordinate rulemaking activity and file the Commission's adopted rules with the Secretary of State. This rule does not override statute, which requires that the Commission adopt all rules. The agency's recommended next step is for the Commission to vote to open rulemaking on June 11th for these three proposed rules.
So Daisha, I have a couple of things I'd like to make sure are clear, and I'm not sure I'm completely clear, so I'll ask you. The delegation of authority is, as I understand it, completely ministerial. So, for example, if I want to sell my car to someone and I go to DMV, the DMV person has is delegated the authority to file my bill of sale or whatever it is. They don't get to evaluate it or change it or do anything. And that's what this is. Is that right? This is something that would allow you or someone else to file something so that, for example, Ken doesn't have to do it. Do I have that
Yes,
correct?
yes, that's exactly correct. And the
Okay,
DMV analogy is a good one.
great, thank
Yes.
you. And the other question I have is when you talk about opening rulemaking, am I correct that, especially for level one, that doesn't mean we're opening a debate process? It means we're opening the first of the steps to go through the statutorily required process.
Yes, that is exactly right.
Great, thanks.
Yes.
I'm glad I understand that. Okay,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yes. Next slide, please, Mara. If there are further questions, I'm prepared to answer them now. The website listed on the screen provides additional information about rulemaking and ways to contact me. Thank you for having me today.
Great presentation, Desha, and really, really helpful slides. I guess this is the timeline. And maybe we'll give people a minute to look at it and see if they have any questions. But that was all really clear.
Good. Yes, I was hoping it would be. So,
Anybody have questions about anything or about this timeline? And this is for these level one rules, right?
yes, this is very, you will see this timeline repeat throughout. We will have discussions about the rules. Future rules are likely to engage in more discussions. And then I will go to the commission and request a motion to open rulemaking. I'll stop. I see Commissioner Kay, so I'll allow you to, Chair.
Sorry to jump in with a late question, but is this the first time these particular restatements are being adopted by the commission? Or
Can
are they replacing other restatements?
Thank you
That
for
makes
that
sense.
question. Yes, yes, it does. Chair Mandelberg, Commissioner Kay, thank you for the question. This is the first time that our agency would be adopting these rules. This is a result of us transitioning into the executive branch on that's incorrect, January 1st of 2025. And it's the first statutory requirement that we have to fulfill to continue on the next step of the process.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Well, I'm sure that the next step will be more complicated, so it's nice to start out with an easy one.
Yes, it will be. Yes. I sincerely appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay, Heather. Heather is here. Fantastic. Um, so we can move on to the next item on the agenda, the OPDC complaint policy. Heather has been putting incredible amount of work in on this, so we're looking forward to hearing her report. And if you're really here, Heather, you're on.
I'm here, but I don't know how well I will be on video, but I am here. So I was able to make it, and thank you for having me. Vice Chair Mandelberg and OPDC commissioners. I'm Heather Kessinger. I am one of the senior policy analysts with OPDC. And as Susan said, we've been drafting a new complaint policy for the agency. And we are on what I'm calling a prioritized or an urgent time frame to have a new updated policy process in place. And we are looking to bring this to the commission in the August 19th meeting. And so I'm just really going to give a high level overview because I'll discuss a little more timeline as we go through. But one thing with updating the new policy, we are looking at the one that we currently have online right now really just addresses complaints with public defense providers. We are redoing our policy, and what we're doing is we're making it all inclusive to where we are bringing in every type of complaint that the agency could receive. So Mara, go ahead and next slide, please. And with that, this complaint policy and process, this policy is going to include how to handle complaints with public defense providers, complaints with, say, our OPDC trial attorneys and appellate agency employees, how to handle complaints with that we receive, say, for the executive director or deputy director, complaints that we may receive for human resources, complaints. How does the board handle complaints if you receive one, or if one has been made towards the board? Next slide, Mara. Public meetings complaints. What is our policy and process going to be if we receive a complaint for public records? And then customer service complaints as well. Next slide, Mara. Thank you. And so with the policy moving forward, it will have a section in there, and we will have processes in place for how complaints will be received at the agency. So all complaints received must be in writing, and they must be submitted through the OPDC online portal or by mail. With the online portal, we are also going to be updating this process as well. We're going to be creating a new web form to where this will be a type of form that could be any type of complaint could be submitted. I've been calling it intake, but we really haven't come up with a name of what we're going to call this form, but it would be information. So information submitted to the agency if there's a public records request or if it's a complaint. We're trying to capture it all in one form so we could come into a tracking system for us. And by having it all in the tracking system, we can review, say, like public comment, public record, a complaint, and then we could determine where to route it. Next slide, please. And so I'm here today and then talk with Vice Chair as well. There is, what does the board do if they receive a complaint? So we have this section of the policy of how, where we're trying to develop this process of how the board, if you receive a complaint, say through a public comment, or if you are just out and about and someone gives you a verbal complaint, how do you handle it? What do you do if you receive a complaint? So a couple suggestions that we're working through within this policy is how to refer the complainant to submit using the online portal or by mail, or if you have received a written complaint, then how does the board submit using the online portal? And then with that submission, you could always attach a document. Next slide, Mara. And then how can the board assist us in development of the policy and process? So with this, I want to really lean on the board as subject matter experts in being able to assist us with how to handle board complaints within the policy or complaints with public meetings, where your expertise with working in the public meetings and receiving complaints, and how you guys are going to how you would handle them. And so using these meetings, the governance subcommittee meetings, is where I really want to come and work hand in hand with the board to really fine tune the process. So that way, when we launch the policy and process, we have everything to be in place for you. Next slide, Mara. And on this slide here, we really have our policy implementation timeline. So we have worked out, since this is prioritized and urgent, this timeline here is this timeline is the next time we will be coming to you for a sub-governance work committee, commission work group, and bring it to commission. So in June, we want to bring policy back so you could engage with the board on fine-tuning that policy, work with process, and we will have more updates at that time, because within the next month, we'll be working internally with our subject matter experts in-house, with our HR department, trial attorneys, appellate, to continue working on process. And I want to be able to bring that back and plug in your components of that. July 2nd, I want to bring back the complaint process and policy to the commission work group. So we could then review the whole process, the whole policy as a whole, and then work with feedback. If you have suggestions or if there's edits, that type of engagement. And then the goal is to have this to the commission August 19th and present to have this approved with the policy process with an effective date of September 1st. And so we're pushing that. So I really am looking for that, the engagement and being able to have this policy and process in front of you for the communication and to really have all of us working that together. And next slide, please. All right. And so any questions where we're on process or feedback?
So I would first of all like to thank you for doing all this work and for a good presentation, and to say that I'm really glad to see that the timeline is as short as it is, because the current complaint process comes from the old PDSC, and it involves procedures and people who are no longer even at the agency. For example, it refers to in-house counsel, which we don't have anymore since we've been in the executive branch. So the need for a new, clear process that reflects the current agency and board situation is really essential, I think. If I understand correctly, and obviously tell me if I don't, what you need from us today is some thoughts and discussion, insights about how the board members, the commission members, should deal with two different things, or how the process should deal with two different things. One is if we receive input or complaints about some other part of the agency or stakeholders or whatever. And the second is what the process should be if somebody else receives complaints about us. Is that the two things you need our input on?
That is correct. Currently, right now, what I have just in draft, is rough draft, is, and it's vague, but I've cross-checked the bylaws to make sure we bring in what you have written in your bylaws. And what we have right now is if a commissioner receives a complaint, if it's verbal, the recommendation is to go back to the complainant and request that they submit online, or they can submit by mail as well. If a commissioner has received a complaint, and let's say by email or a written complaint, the recommendation is they could either go back and refer the complainant to submit online or by mail, or the commissioner can go ahead and just submit on the online portal. And that web form will have a place where you can attach that complaint. So if you received it by email, you can attach it within that web form submission. And where those will go is, the way it's set up is it will go onto a tracker. And we have the first eyes of review are going to be with our senior policy analyst. We have the confidentiality are within our positions because we see the litigations and torts that come through. So we have to have the confidentiality. And due to the types of complaints that the agency can receive, or also due to employee complaints, we have to have them come through one tracker to where we can screen them and then route the complaint to the appropriate section to be able to review and determine if there's an investigation. So we're setting it up to be able to make sure that we cover the confidentiality pieces that are involved sometimes with complaints. And that's kind of why we want to be able to work with the board so that they're comfortable with submitting the complaints, but then have a real, have a process where it's not a barrier to have to get them to us, if that makes if that's helpful.
What's the current thinking about how complaints about the board get tracked?
They will go onto a tracker, and with this policy, we're going to have reporting. And when I say reporting, that means they will collect data. So when we receive a complaint, we're going to be able to track who submitted the complaint, who is the complaint on, is it a section? And then with these complaints, we will be tracking where they are at in process, and then turn times on them as well. So each division or section in the agency will have an acknowledgement time frame or a time frame for an investigation. And all of this information will go onto the tracker so we can report out on a dashboard of time of how many complaints we have. So we could say, we have 10 complaints against the board, we'll have a status. We have X amount of complaints against an employee. We have X amount of complaints, say, on a provider. And so we will have this all within a tracking system of being able to pull reports of how many are either being actively investigated, how many are closed, how many received.
And who investigates the complaint? I understand if it's a complaint about an agency employee, that would probably go to HR. How are you determining who investigates various kinds of complaints? So, for example, who would investigate a complaint against the board? Who would investigate a complaint against a provider? How are you? What are your thoughts about how those decisions get made?
If a complaint comes through, I'm going to say a provider, for example, we will screen and we'll be able to cross-check it and determine it's a provider complaint. Provider complaints will go to our trial support and development section, because they are the section that handles complaints on providers, and they have their processes in place for complaints. If, for example, if the board receives a complaint, we would screen the complaint, and it is drafted in the policy of the escalation path for who would investigate a board complaint. So if it's a complaint on the board in a whole, we would send those to the executive director. If it's a complaint, sorry, I'd have to refer to my notes. I have it written out, but because of my internet, I've hotspotted in, so I'm not able to pull up my notes. But we have, if it's a complaint, say on policy that went to the board, that would go to the chair. If there is a complaint, say on the chair, then that would go to vice chair. If there's a complaint on the chair and vice chair, then that would go to the legislative subcommittee chair. And complaints as a whole then go to executive director. And this is draft, but this is where just figuring out where the escalation path would be and making that determination. But that's also another piece that when we come back in June, where as our group, we would still work through that, you know, if we have questions or if we want to flag anything that we may need to edit to have it, make sure we line it up properly.
Okay, great. So does anybody have any questions or concerns about what you've heard so far?
I have a quick question. I'm just wondering about how many complaints are being kind of received currently. Are we talking about 10 a year, 5 a year, 2 a year? I mean, obviously a process is important regardless of the volume, but I guess I'm interested to know what the landscape looks like.
That's an excellent question, and I don't have that answer, but I could find out how many questions on average our agency receives and bring that back.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know. Because as I understand it, all of this gets funneled through you and Jennifer Bell, the senior policy analyst. And I'm sure at least part of Philippe's concern might be, or mine certainly would be, whether the volume would be so much that it would overwhelm the two of you and keep you from doing all of your other duties. So is that something you all have thought about?
We have, and the role that Jennifer and I would have would be screening them and routing them to the correct section or division, or even division or section, or even routing to the board if it's a complaint that comes through that we need to forward to the board. So we're more of the screening to make sure they get to the correct place. And then our role as well is, you know, checking our tracker to make sure the timeframes are being met. So acknowledgements are going out, timeframes for decisions are being made. So we wouldn't be the ones investigating.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Leslie, I see your hand, and then Haley.
Yeah, and Haley may have been first, but that's okay. What constitutes a complaint? I guess, how are you defining what a complaint is, and would a public comment be a complaint? Since those seems to be regularly filed in connection with our commission meetings. So the question is, what is a complaint, or how are you defining it for the purposes of the complaint procedure?
How would we define the complaint? We do have a definition, but really a complaint, that's a large definition. I mean, someone could be dissatisfied with their service. Maybe I'm going to say an employee, for example, maybe they feel harassed at work. So there's many levels of that, and we could bring more of that definition back. But I'm going to go back to that piece where you said on public comment. Maybe someone submits a public comment. Well, there could be a complaint within that public comment. So we want to be able to look for those. And that's that piece where we want to engage with the board with as well. And because you guys receive your public comments for a public meeting and comment, and that's where the board may see complaints within that when they receive that comment. And that's the piece that we want to be able to capture to be able to make sure that we address that complaint and get it to the correct person to work with the complainant to either have it investigated, then come to a resolution. I'm not sure if I answered your question completely, but I'm more than happy to get you a better definition, like that we do have written into that policy for now. Now, too, I'm going to kind of go piggyback on that a little bit. within our processes, each section and division, they're going to have to determine their own processes for how they handle complaints. And so that each division and section will probably most likely has their own definition of what is a complaint for our, like, say, providers, or employees, or a director. I probably stumbled on that a little bit, but I can get you better definitions.
Haley.
So this is kind of the same question a little bit, but so the current policy right now, is there an online form currently, or do people have to mail in complaints, like if it was on a provider or a member of the board, or what's the current method?
There is a current form online that
Okay.
people can submit complaints in. And we do also receive them in the mail, and then we send them over to our child support and development.
So then
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, typically the complaints we receive on the form, that form is designed for those provider complaints. And we are going to be redoing that form to capture any type of complaint that could come in.
Okay, so then that's what I was going to ask. Do you think that it will increase the workload on the I guess you guys that are screening that by having a catch-all form? I mean, is that something that
it will, yes, we will be screening more, but if we're looking agency wide and more long term, it's actually will be streamlined and make it more efficient for our agency. Because right now our agency does not have a clear defined process for all the different types of complaints. And what we need to develop is written processes, how all the different sections handle a complaint, how do they document a complaint? Are they all reviewed the same way? And what are their different turn times of being able to, how long is an investigation? How long do they need to respond with a resolution? So within the agency, all the different divisions and sections are going to have these different turn times. And so with the process, we have to really have this written out. And we also have to make sure we document to show that we've handled each complaint identically. So if I'm going to use a provider, right? We have 3 providers. They all submit the same complaint. We need to be able to document and show our work to say that we reviewed each of their providers' complaints exactly the same, and show that what type of outcome it is, how did we resolve it, and those time frames. So it feels like, yes, there's more work, but it's more of a cleaning it up and making it more efficient. And so we could have, so these complaints, so they don't fall through the cracks, or say one isn't being handled the same way as another. And so we're just really trying to make it a more equitable process and clean it up for the agency, and have something so everyone who gets a complaint, they can go to their process guide and know how to handle it and what that result should be. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Heather, I know that people on the committee are probably hearing about this and thinking about it for the first time. And we'll have another chance, obviously, in the work group. But would you welcome people giving you written input between now and the work group? If as they think about this after the meeting today, they have some ideas or some questions they'd like to have addressed at the work group, would you be willing to get emails about that?
Yes, I would. I would appreciate that very much.
So can you share your I'll get Mara to email the committee members with your email address, and because of public meeting laws, we shouldn't be emailing each other. So it's fine to send emails to an agency staff person. So Mara can send out your address, and if people have additional thoughts or questions, if you would send them directly to Heather, and she can address those then when we have the work session. Does that work for everybody? I'm not seeing any yeses. I'm not seeing any no's. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna
No,
assume
I-
that works.
I'm gonna say I would actually truly really would appreciate the feedback, suggestions. This policy is going to be going out to subject matter experts within the agency, and where they're going to be contributing. And then once that policy goes out, I'm going to be setting up work group sessions with the subject matter experts so we could start working through the process to develop the process. So when we get this policy approved and then we launch it, we want to be ready to go. And so your feedback, the suggestions will be really helpful because I could take those into our work group sessions when we start developing it. And then that will help expand that lens for how we will handle anything from the public meetings, public comments, or board complaints. So that way, when we are working through the whole matrix of this process, I will have that lens to be like, oh, we need to think about the board here. We need to think about public meeting here. So I really would appreciate the comments or feedback, anything that would be helpful.
Thank you so much for your presentation and your really incredibly difficult work on this. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and apologize I got in late and I'm having some internet issues.
It was not in your control.
Zoom waffling.
We're glad you persevered. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Okay, so we're a little bit early, but mostly on time for a discussion about the memo that we are going to be putting together to give to commissioners before the board has to answer the commission part of the KPMs. And I see that Kim Freeman is here. She is the absolute expert on everything KPM. So if we need some input, I'm sure she'll let us know, correct anything we're doing incorrectly. As sort of a introduction into the discussion, we have to do these KPMs as an agency. There's several that are required by statute for us to do as board members. We do not get to change what those questions are that we answer without going through the legislature. When we requested some changes to the agency KPMs, this time we decided not to ask for changes to the board KPMs. My understanding is that that would open up a question about what goes to the boards of other agencies because they like things to be sort of uniform. So the questions we have are the questions that we're stuck with. But what we previous iterations of this committee were thinking is that um, it would be useful for board members to have a memo from us defining some aspects of the KPM questions that may not have been clear, and also summarizing in various categories what the board has accomplished in the years since the last KPMs. And so Mara has been keeping track of the board's accomplishments and activities within those certain categories. And when we get closer to doing the KPMs, we'll be able to start putting together the actual memo. But what we are working with now is trying to define some of the terms that people have found maybe not as clear as they should be in the past. So the first that we were looking at was the KPM asks about how well we're accomplishing our mission. The question is, the agency's mission and high-level goals are current and applicable. And so questions have come up on what is meant by our mission and high-level goals. We already have a statement in our bylaws about what the agency mission is, but it's kind of very general, possibly not very illuminating statement. So Haley uh, has sent in a suggestion to Mara, and what it says. Mara, do you want to share the screen that share the document that I sent to you?
Yes. Yeah, I'll pull it
Thank
up
you.
right now.
Okay.
Can everyone see that okay? Would you like me to zoom in?
Uh, can everybody see this? Can you make it a
I
tiny bit bigger?
see it.
A little bit bigger? Okay. So this is what our bylaws currently say about our mission. It's in section 1D of our bylaws. I'll just give everybody a minute to read that. So that's what's in our bylaws. And if folks think that that's sufficient for us to be able to, for members to be able to respond to the KPM. KPM again is the agency's mission and high-level goals are current and applicable. Um, we could, if people don't think this is sufficient, supplement these bylaws in our memo. It wouldn't be changing the bylaws, but we would be supplementing it in our memo to the board. And there are a couple of different suggestions. Could you move up a little bit on that, please, Mara? So Haley suggested an explanation focused on core responsibility and our success in advancing it. So this is the language that Haley submitted to Mara. Obviously, that would need to be turned into a mission statement. And then if you go a little bit farther, Mara, um, these were my thoughts. And it seemed to me that we had sort of three different kinds of missions. So you can read that. And so I'll leave it open to some discussion about whether we just want to refer commission members to our statement in the bylaws, or whether we want the memo that we're going to provide to discuss the mission in some more detailed way. Any thoughts? Yeah, Leslie, I think we're a small enough group. There's only four of us. We can just go ahead and talk.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I always think of the Constitution as being a floor as opposed to a ceiling in terms of, you know, our aspirations maybe as a public defense program. But, you know, for the purposes of KPMs, you know, I don't know if we want to be aspirational or not. You know, it seems like there's always pros and cons. Um,
There are
you
pros
know,
and cons. I mean, the KPMs are used by DAS and by legislative fiscal. And again, here Kim can correct me if I'm wrong or incomplete, but my understanding is that what mostly matters is the number of or the percentage of respondents who agree with the statement. And to the extent that a large number of respondents agree with the statement, it makes it seem as though the agency is in great shape. The board in this case is in great shape, right? And part of the problem with people not understanding what some things meant was that if people didn't understand the question, they couldn't respond positively to the statement.
So does that suggest really simplifying the KPMs? I mean, making them
We can't change the KPMs.
okay.
That has to go through the legislature. That is a big deal. So
Yeah,
we're stuck with these KPMs.
you're not changing them, but revising them. I mean, or
We can't revise the KPMs. All
okay,
we can do is give information to commissioners about what the KPMs mean and are trying to get at, so that all of us are sort of on the same wavelength when we go to respond to those KPMs. We cannot change the KPMs.
okay, got it.
Frustrating as that may be, we can't do that.
So the statement that you have provided, and was it Haley provided, are those explanations of the existing KPMs are fleshing them out? Is that what we're trying to do here?
We're trying to give an explanation of what our mission is. So
Mhm.
here's the KPM. The agency's mission and high-level goals are current and applicable. We would like as many people as possible to answer that yes. And so if you don't know what our mission and high-level goals are, it's not really are we meeting them, it's just whether our definition of them is current and applicable.
Mhm.
So, or our understanding of them. It doesn't even say definition. The agency's mission and high-level goals are current and applicable. So it would be useful, I think, if everyone on the board had a shared understanding of our mission and high-level goals. That's
I,
what we're trying to achieve.
Okay.
And
so,
so,
and
go ahead,
I
Philip.
got I got that survey without anyone pointing me to the mission and goals. So I think I probably answered no when I got it. But I agree with Haley that I feel like there's a big void in our mission statement. Th- Whether or not it's worth changing a mission statement, because I feel like that will take so much time and discussion rather than just being able to articulate it. But I agree with what the premises on this, which is, I think part of the problem is that this stuff is there's a lot of relatively new members, myself included, who don't have there's only so much time in the day, and there's a lot of documents. So, maybe making this stuff more accessible would help certainly increase the awareness and ability to answer appropriately on these questions. But I agree that the mission statement is doesn't inspire me.
The one
And
in the bylaws.
yeah. And, I mean, I think that you can be a prudent and I like the way that you laid out all of the obligations that the State Office of Public Defense has. I think that you can lean into all of those and still have a more meaningful mission statement. So, I think it's worth considering. It does seem like the kind of thing that would create a lot of more work in an area that really I don't know will have a substantive. Um, there's so much to do, but I think it's worth talking about. It's worth thinking about.
Well, there's no
And
reason we can't amend the bylaws. I mean,
and
if,
I think for me, like when I
but
got
that's it. Go ahead.
sorry. Oh, sorry.
I was
When
just
I
going to
got
say we
the
can amend the bylaws, but that's a different issue from what we should do about giving guidance on the KPM issue. So um, we can certainly down the road discuss amending the bylaws. I'd like to keep the two discussions separate if possible. Haley?
So yeah, so what I understood was that this was a essentially like a mission of what the KPMs are as far as what their mission is in the function of OPDC. And so kind of defining essentially what they are and the mission of that is that because that's kind of like when I was saying, the mission definition of the KPM should help measure whether OPDC is actually advancing the responsibility. So like you're measuring all these things, and are the things that you're measuring actually advancing and the system capacity, the service quality, the timeliness, the stuff that's in the bylaws,
The
but are
KPM is
just
not
very
asking whether the KPM is not asking whether we are meeting our goals. It's asking whether the goals are current and applicable to what we do.
okay.
It's not asking if we are meeting the goals. Now, there
Okay,
may
but
be
it's
a
still
different
measured though.
KPM somewhere that's asking if we're meeting the goals, but it's not this one.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Kim, jump in if I have that wrong, but because that's important.
No, you are absolutely correct. This is the board or the commit what this is the board's KPM, right? All
Right.
the other KPMs, which are currently on hold at the moment that we've been discussing over time, really have to do with performance. I think to some of the conversations that you guys are all having around agency performance and measuring KPMs on many things, right? But this KPM that this group is talking about is specifically related to the board of OPDC.
So do we think that the agency's mission and high-level goals are the right ones, essentially? Does the agency have we articulated the right mission and high-level goals? I guess that's what it's asking. Um, and I hear Philippe saying we could do it better in our bylaws.
I think so. I mean, I think I would make this it's almost two questions in my head. One is a substantive question of, are our mission and high level goals where we should be pointed? And that's one thing. But have we articulated those is another question. And I think that the second one's much easier. It's kind of low hanging fruit because I think when I started, having that there really isn't a repository or anything that's accessible that outlines the mission and the high level goals of the commission. And I think, being able to have something that's more accessible that articulates the mission and high level goals, like, and I don't know if this is what you were thinking in terms of what would be produced in terms of this exercise, because I think that articulating it is, changing it and refining it is a lot harder than just being able to articulate it. And I think we fail at the articulation part. I don't know. I don't know that we have defined high level goals in a meaningful way.
Yeah. So I think you've convinced me that the two discussions are so closely related that we need to have both of them. Thank you very much. And so there is no reason why this subcommittee cannot suggest to the commission that we amend the bylaws to state our mission and high-level goals better. And all we have to do as a committee, if that's what we want to recommend to the board, and then the board votes on it, right? And if the board decides to amend the bylaws, they get amended. It's not a hard thing to do. So if that's what this committee thinks is a good idea. It would be great to do it before we have to answer these KPMs. And so, um, if we wanted to put together a better mission statement, we could do that and recommend it to the board. And one way to do it, we only have a half an hour left to go in this meeting. One way to do it would be to try to draft that at this meeting. A second way to do it would be for everyone to take a hand at drafting it and sending it tomorrow. And we could have another committee meeting that's not normally scheduled, but we could try to find a time to have one and try to get that in front of the whole commission as soon as possible. I don't know if there's room on the June agenda to do that. I think there might be, but I'm not sure. We could probably get it on the July agenda. Kim, when do we have to do these KPMs?
Chair Mandenberg, the KPMs are due to the what I call the LFO system by September 30. But usually what happens is once we do all the agencies' KPMs, like the annual customer service survey, when we come back and present that information to the commission, usually that's either August or September. So we have some time in there. And
Okay.
the final report into the system, I technically have until 9/30
Got it.
of
And so
2026 to get it input.
we don't have to do the board ones right away. We can do
Right.
those in August. So
Yep.
maybe the thing to do, Leslie and Haley and Philippe, if you would all take a stab at redrafting the mission statement in the bylaws, send your drafts tomorrow, and we will discuss them at the June committee meeting. That will give us enough time to work on this. And we'll try to get it on the July commission agenda, okay?
Just jumping back, did we as a board flunk this question last year? Is that why we're here?
I'd have to go back and look at the memo that was in the materials. I don't remember, but
I was just trying to figure out if we have a problem in search of a solution or not, or
I think that one of the things that these KPMs do when we're thinking through dealing with them is they help us get better. And so if we can get better with a better mission statement, I don't see why we should hesitate to do that.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with Philippe, and I guess because I didn't know either, like what the high level goals really were. It was kind of a hard thing, I mean, to find. So I'm like, when we were defining this, I was like, well, is it defining the KPM itself and what it's like to measure that the board is doing or not doing? Like, I don't. So now I feel like I have a clearer understanding that we need. I feel like we need to know what those actually are, even if it's categories.
Let's work on it. Okay, the other thing that was confusing to at least one board member was the KPM number 12 says commission members act in accordance with their roles as public representatives. And at least one board member wasn't clear what role as public representatives means. And Haley, again, thank you so much for doing all this work on this, Haley. That was really helpful. What Haley sent in tomorrow was the commission's role in representing the public interest through oversight. There we go. Okay, thank you, Mara. That's what Haley sent in. Um, So Haley's actual statement was more, the commission's role in representing the public interest through oversight of Oregon's public defense system. That's what's there. She added, I think something that conveys ensuring the system is accountable, transparent, fiscally responsible, and capable of providing constitutionally adequate representation to eligible persons. So um, we can't change the KPM. The KPM is commission members act in accordance with their roles as public representatives. Do we want to provide in our memo some clarification of what our role as a public representative is, or do we want to just let people use their own sense and definition of that?
I mean, if someone, and that may have been me, I don't know, but if someone responded that it was unclear, I certainly can see why. I would hear that question and think of, basic decorum. But I prefer Haley's definition. It's more substantive, but I think it would make sense to have a consistent understanding of what that means. Um, and again, my initial thought when I read that is that it is are people acting in a basic with a level of decorum in these meetings and towards each other.
Well, I'm happy to, when we draft this memo about KPMs, include this uh, Haley's definition. Um, the other one that's possible is this notion of oversight focused on efficiency and cost effectiveness and ensuring sufficient resources, blah, blah, blah. So some combination of those things, people would be comfortable with that in a memo.
That'd be great.
Haley, Leslie?
Yeah,
Jennifer?
definitely. I
So,
agree.
so when you get to the point of putting this memo together, which will be mostly, I think, Mara's, we'll list what the KPMs are, but mostly Mara's review of what we've done um, this year. Then, of course, that'll come before this committee, before it goes out to anybody else. The KPM about the commission's relationship to the audit function, that'll all be taken care of uh, when we continue dealing with the charter. And one of the biggest issues in that charter is whether the audit committee needs to be a public meeting. And Ken and Rob and I will be meeting with DOJ lawyers next week to get a legal opinion on how that all works. And once we have that legal opinion, we'll be able to move forward with yet another iteration of that audit committee charter. So we don't need to talk about that today. And the last thing that's on the agenda is where is my agenda? Sorry. Um, the whether there should be a board annual performance review of the executive director. There are two KPMs that deal with that. KPM number one says the executive director's performance expectations are current, and number two says the executive director receives annual performance feedback. In the 2.5 years I've been on the commission, I've never seen a statement of performance expectations for the executive director, and we have never given the executive director annual performance feedback. Um, so that's something that's important. I would add that our executive director is subject to dismissal by the governor for cause. There's nothing in the statute, in our statutes, that define for cause. I can't give legal advice, but I've done research into Oregon case law, And I can't find a definition of for cause that relates to a public employee, except for definitions that are very specific to certain agencies, not ours. So this notion of for cause seems to be whatever the governor thinks cause might be. And so I'm just throwing that out there as one thing to consider when we're talking about evaluating our executive director. And Philippe has graciously offered to take over the rest of this meeting and lead the discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and it gave me an opportunity to look into kind of the interplay that we're dealing with. Because going into the executive branch not too long ago, as we've heard in so many different ways, we're now part of their rule set, and part of that is that the Department of Administrative Services will do a biannual 360 review of um, sorry, 360 review of the executive director. It's still our role as the commission um, to set standards, which, and I think this, at least to me, this strikes me as not necessarily the right order of operations, is that they do a review and we set standards. But it and I only got this from prior commission materials. So I didn't find it independently on the DAS website, but it seems like the 360 review is starting in June of 2026. So Ken's going to be subject to a 360 review conducted by Gallup, and the agency is big enough that there's not it's not our recommendation this happens as a course, and so we'll get that, and it will have the standard questions. What is our responsibility is um, is setting the standards and expectations for the executive director, um, and and we have uh, some, I think, some really good drafts already out there um, from you, Susan, in the October 2nd material. And what it does is it incorporates, I think we could incorporate a lot of what is expectations that are statutory or otherwise, and then make sure that we're adding in OPDC specific expectations. Um, and I think that the important way to look at it is that, and this came up once before, our role via the agency is kind of through Ken. And so kind of outlining how that relationship works, and the expectations for the board and what we should be involved in and what we shouldn't be involved in, I think are really important, not just substantive or not just, procedural things. And so my two recommendations after kind of going into this is that we should have a board liaison with the Gallup um, DAS organization. So someone from the commission should be involved in the 360 um, evaluation. And I haven't heard anything else about it other than finding it in old commission materials. But it is a biannual requirement. It's happening. And then so we should receive that should be conducted, and then we should receive an executive summary um, of that. What I think our work as the governance subcommittee should and would be, and I would recommend putting this on the top of our to-do list, would be creating um, uh, executive director performance expectations. I think evaluation we can worry much less about because it's being done by the Gallup organization as part of the larger. But I think we don't have, as far as I've seen, we don't have any standards or expectations that we promulgated. And
Okay.
so I think that your earlier version is a great starting place, and I would recommend that we set ourselves a timeline and a goal for getting a recommendation to the full committee because it's in the KPMs, it's one of our essential tasks, and ultimately it's going to help us, it's going to help me and all the other newer commissioners understand what we should be expecting vis-a-vis Ken and the agency oversight. So my recommendation would be that um, we send your October 2nd memo to everyone, um, and that we put that on the agenda for recommendation, and then that we designate someone to liaison with the Gallup organization when the 360 starts, so that we have someone who's on the commission who can at least say, surveys went out, they're asking this. This is, if anyone has any questions.
Okay. The two KPMs. One is that the performance expectations are current, and so your suggestion deals with that one. Great. The other one is that the executive director receives annual performance feedback. So we would have to answer that one no, because it implies annual performance feedback from the board. Um,
Well, so if we adopt the Gallup feedback, I mean, I can't imagine that we're going to do any better and more thorough than DAS is doing in that regard. That's biannual, so I think it's easy enough for us to think of ways to incorporate it. But I certainly don't think that you have to have two separate processes. I think that us adding something to the DAS
yeah, it's
process will
weird.
be more than
It's weird.
sufficient.
But we don't know the DAS Gallup questions. And and so if the DAS Gallup questions are similar or identical to the ones that we put together in expectations, then it would make more sense to rely on the Gallup feedback. But if our expectations are different in some way from what they're measuring, then it might make sense to have some sort of feedback loop put in there. So I guess one place to start would be to put together our expectations, get a hold of what the Gallup ones are, and see what they do. Leslie or Haley, any thoughts about this as we're going forward here?
I'm just wondering, have we met with DOS to get a better understanding of their process before we sort of launch into, you know, devising our own expectations? I'm just wondering if there's a template that applies to all state agency heads.
No, we haven't. But those are great
And
questions.
yeah,
Which gets us to Philippe's suggestion of a liaison. How
yeah.
how would you feel about being the liaison, Philippe? You're kind of in the weeds on this already.
I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to reach out to someone and try to do that. Yeah,
Do we have
um,
any other volunteers who'd like to vie with Philippe for
I'm happy to
the
cede that
honor?
position to anyone else who wants it too. So I'm
I
happy
would
to do it.
be
I'm happy to cede it.
I would be absolutely thrilled if you would undertake that.
Sure.
Great. Um, okay, so Mara, if you would circulate that October 2nd memo to everyone. And so another assignment for the June committee meeting would be to come up with any additions, deletions, corrections, edits, whatever, to performance expectations for the executive director, and we can discuss those. Again, Mara will make those available either by sending the compilation out and posting it before our next meeting, or we'll do it the way we did it this time with me putting together a compilation that we share at the meeting, or both. We cannot circulate those among ourselves because of the public meeting laws that prevent us from being able to do that, even though that would be much more efficient. Um,
If I can ask Mara, if there's any contacts at DAS that I should reach out to rather than just cold calling, if you could send those to me. I'm happy to cold call, but
I think Ken may also know, and Mara can run down the hall and ask him. I think Ken may also know who the right contacts would be, or Emma Shea would.
Yeah, I
So
can
yeah,
do some looking and I'll talk with Ken also and we'll get you some leads.
great.
great, thank you.
Mhm.
Well, we've been efficient. Is there anything else anyone wants to add to anything we've discussed today? Are there any new business anyone wants to raise?
Nothing from me other than like golf ball sized hail that just came down for like 5 minutes
Oh,
straight.
no.
It's
Oh,
wild
gosh.
right now.
Oh, well, go take care of your family and your animals and be safe, okay?
Yes.
Okay. It's so crazy. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
I
Bye.
See you in June, I guess. Bye-bye.